Politics and video games, those surely do not go well together, do they? Well, I want to talk about the link between the two of them. I was watching a video about keeping politics out of video games, and I came across a really great comment. I will feature here. You can also look at the other video that politics in games has like 4 different meanings. Firstly, games entirely based on real-world political issues, but having no particular perspective on them. 2, games based on real-world political issues that have a clear point to persuade you of. Number 3, games with their own fictional in-game politics that is only related to the real world by analogy. And 4, games not particularly based on politics at all, just cruelly injects real-world political gimmicks for the sake of pandering to the minority of the audience who agrees with you. These are all completely different. Now, what I see from the media and journalists and the vocal minorities on Twitter, they really want to see more of the fourth one, unfortunately. But the thing is gamers, we don't want that. When you play games, we don't really care about real-world politics. We're getting away from them. Mostly, I would say, a vast majority of people prefer 3 games with their own fictional in-game politics that only relate to the real world by analogy. The fourth one, again, trying to push or wedge in those political ideas or agendas, are very hacky for the most part. It's just a sign of terrible, bad writing. And for a vast majority of the people of gamers, they loathe it, they detest it. And they'll be critical of it, and for good reason, because it tends to be not good storytelling, it's getting in the way of what the game is. And what's been happening these last half decade or so, more often than not, the creators or these journalists or the media are outright mocking the fans or insulting them, saying that if they don't like it, that they're sexist or they're racist or they're bigots. And that's what they use as their form of criticism repellent. They don't actually look at the criticism that comes from, well, this is just bad writing, these are poorly thought out characters. Instead, they just play the card, well, if you don't like it, that means you're sexist or racist or a bigot. And that's not true at all. Look at a game like Kingdom Come Deliverance that sold very well for its budget and is inherently a political game based on where it is. But the media was critical about it because it didn't have people of color, even though in that time frame, in that period, it didn't really happen. Of course, we could also look at Battlefield 5 with their progressive agenda and how a lot of the people were saying, well, if you don't like it, don't buy it. And while many people still did end up buying the game, numbers were still far below than what they were expecting. Now, I don't want to say this was 100% the reason that people did not buy the game as much as EA was expecting, but it for sure played a factor. We've seen over the last decade how out of touch the media can be with the actual consumers, especially the form of video game journalism. Let's talk more about this misconception that gamers don't like politics in games. They do. They just don't care for real-world politics getting shoved into things. They're more about games with their own politics. We like these games. If you look at some of the most highly regarded games or best-selling games, you do see a lot of them can be very political. For example, look at the Mass Effect series. Look at how much political intrigue there is there. Look at situations like the Genophage and how much is there. Look at how much people enjoy the Mass Effect games, even the, questionable ending aside for Mass Effect 3 and some of the storytelling that fell apart after the first game, but look how well loved those games are, even after all these years. And then you have Andromeda, which had God only knows how many issues going on with it. And having more of a political agenda of pushing things forward of their ideologies sure did not help them. Now that was more in the background. The game had many other glaring issues up front, but it was still a factor. Look at the Fallout series, especially Fallout New Vegas. Now you have the New California Republic, you have Kaiser's Legion, you have Mr. House, you could run an independent Vegas, you also have all these other factions, you have the Brotherhood of Steel, you have the Great Khans. Any of these factions that you decide to partner up with and help decide who runs the Mojave, they all have their pros and cons. The game at this point is getting up to its 10-year release, and if you look at any video on Fallout New Vegas, you could just see how much discussion still goes on, like who is the best choice for the Mojave? Is it the New California Republic? Is it Kaiser's Legion? Is it Mr. House? Or is running a independent Vegas the best choice? Look at people like Oxhorn who break down these videos and how many YouTube videos you could find about which faction is best for the Mojave. Read any of those comments and you'll see people say, you know that Obsidian did something right, when nearly 10 years later, people are still talking about what faction is best to partner with. Chris Avallone, who worked on the Fallout New Vegas series and one of the few I'd call genuinely good writers of the video game industry, had this to say about top politics. When it comes to politics, he thinks the game is better served by asking a question, providing a range of perspectives on the question, but then leaving the answer to the player. I try to frame any politics in the parameters of the world, the lore, and the franchise. And you could see this in play in Fallout New Vegas, as in who's the best to be running the Mojave and to be running New Vegas. The game gives you all these different factions of different ideas and ideologies and lets you decide what you want to do. Look at a series like Metal Gear Solid, which pulls a lot of interesting political things throughout history and is very political. And look how well loved Metal Gear Solid series is. Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines is a cult classic. It is based on the tabletop role-playing game Vampire: The Masquerade, which is incredibly political. You have these different factions within this world. You have the Sabbat, you have the Camarilla, you have the Anarchs, you have the Independents, you have the Kuei Jin. The game and the tabletop game is very, very political, and people love Bloodlines. I'm a huge fan of it. And you get all these, looking at what Avallone said about laying out these questions, again, this pops up again in Vampire: The Masquerade, is who is best suited for running Los Angeles? On a further note, the latest edition of the tabletop game got swapped up in controversy by trying to push real-world politics and was getting quite pandering about it, which people rightly rejected. I play the tabletop Vampire: The Masquerade, but I don't play the most recent edition. I play an older one, and I don't get any involved with any current politics in the world. From what I've seen and heard so far, I'm not going to be surprised if Bloodlines 2 does unfortunately go the direction of political pandering. Now, I do know Chris Avallone is involved with the game, but unfortunately over the last few years where he's been popping up on a number of projects as he's freelance, it's hard to gauge how much of an impact he really has if he's just brought in briefly or if he has quite a large part in it. I hope he has a large part in this game. If Chris Avallone does play a large factor, I am sure we will see his approach of asking a question and laying out all these different ideologies for the player to decide what they want to go with. Deus Ex, there's another very political, very well-loved franchise, especially the first game, where it takes a lot of these conspiracy theories and spins them into this world that the game's created. Then unfortunately you have something like Mankind Divided, which I'm actually playing at the time of recording this. And while good, it is very heavy-handed with the current politics of applying it to what goes on in the game and what is happening in our real world. There's a great article I found about should video games be political? The answer is complicated. I will post a link to it that you could read in full. So, like every other medium, games should absolutely cover political issues like terrorism, war, liberty, tyranny, and so forth. Like every other medium, doing so in a way that touches on universal truths, long-standing controversies, is more effective than trying to wedge in the hot-button political ideas of the here and now. Likewise, political entertainment should be about making us think and scrutinize ideas, not about convincing us to vote in a certain way. So when he talks about this here, about wedging in hot-button political issues of the here and now, I think we've been seeing too much of that in the current trend in gaming, especially from the media. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things that are going on right now that are universal truths that we've dealt throughout history, but if you get too much into pushing these kind of things, then you are very easily going to be dating your game. Continuing on the article, we should think about these issues and what they mean on the broader political stage. A video game is a great way to get people thinking, asking questions, examining the world they live in and the history that came before us. Again, using Fallout New Vegas again, because it's such a great example, look at all the interesting questions it asks the player and gives them all these different perspectives on it and decides to let them choose what the answer is.
No, I'll destroy it because it's inevitable that it be destroyed. It's Hegelian dialectics, not personal animosity.
On the other hand, games cheapen themselves when all they do is focus on the politics of the moment. Stamping current political figures or trends into a game or film dates it quickly. This is where the problem arises. You see a lot of this media really trying to push for more of this, give us more of the current politics in games and more of that ideology pushing that gamers push back against. Now, a joke here and there every once in a little while is okay. I mean, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines did make some jokes towards the Bush administration, but it was just like a little one-liner. It wasn't a huge thing. It's more when you start to encapsulate the entire story around this that things get hacky and you get people pushing back. And then the media or the creators will push back on people getting away from the criticism by saying, well, you know, you're sexist or you're a bigot. And unfortunately, all those things they like to go to in our modern world. But what happens when a game focuses on universal truths or things that have lasted throughout human history? Look at something, again, coming back to the example of New Vegas. You see all these things. You have ineffective bureaucracies. You have passing the buck. You have these totalitarian regimes that could crumble when their leader passes away. You also have like a great man who strives to make the world a better place, but also has selfish issues. It's very interesting to play through Fallout New Vegas and seeing the ending slides to see what your choices impacted the world around you. After all these years, people are still talking about Fallout New Vegas, one of those games that have stood the test of time, which I have done a video about here, card there. Look at a thing like Mass Effect, which covers things like xenophobia, genocide, galactic politics that a lot can be seen throughout our own history. Look at how well those games have held up and how well loved they are. Players are absolutely fine with having politics in games, as long as it's not becoming a ideology pushing game. Give those questions to the player. Let them decide what answer they want to choose. Give them different possibilities. That is fine. Gamers are absolutely fine with that. It's just more when you start pushing these current trends or ideologies, you're greatly dating yourself. And you're ending up with gamers who push back, and you end up with this issue of you get back and forth between gamers and the media. That's been my thoughts about politics and games. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you watched, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like. I'll see you again. Boulder Punch out.